Before we dive into today's episode, I have something truly special to share. Next September, I'll be leading an intimate women's retreat through the south of France and northern Italy, and you're invited. Picture this: mornings exploring the colorful markets of the French Riviera, afternoons sipping wine, and a hotel view with golden Mediterranean sunsets. Whether you love photography, food, or just want to reconnect with your playful creative self, this trip is designed for you. Spots are limited, so if all this sounds like your kind of adventure, please visit tourwithabsolutely.com and look for the tour France and Italy with Crystal. You can also send me a message or check out the show notes. Claudine Hemingway is a descendant of famed writer Ernest Hemingway. We bumped into each other at a party and decided to team up and dive deep into French history, but with a twist, by bringing a spotlight to those lesser-known creatives in France. This is History with a Hemingway. Welcome back, guys. I'm here with Claudine, and today we're talking about the coronation of Napoleon, which actually happened today.
Yeah, so exactly 220 years ago today, December 2nd, 1804, Napoleon crowned himself the Emperor of France. And this is, of course, in one place that's big on the news right now, because in a matter of 5 days, Notre Dame is going to be open again.
Insane.
I know, I cannot even believe it. But I could not miss this date, being December 2nd, to not talk about this event. And this will probably be, there's going to definitely be a second part to this, because I've been researching this now for about 2 months. And when I do that, it ends up being multiple parts, because it's just, there's too many good things that I need to share. But I wanted to specifically talk today about the event itself and the painting that's in the Louvre that marks that event. So as I said, on December 2nd, 1804, Napoleon crowned himself. And this is 1804, so we're post-revolution. So at the time, France had moved away from a monarchy, moved away from a king. And so, he definitely didn't want to say that he was the king, because everybody had a pretty bad taste in their mouth for kings. So he decided, hey, I'll just become an emperor.
As one does. I mean, you can't have the king become an emperor.
Yeah, I mean, as of today, I am going to be known as the Empress.
I love this.
Is that how you get to do that?
Yeah, just got to say it. That's how you do it. He's a super manifester.
Exactly. So going back a little bit, on August 2nd, 1802, he was named the Council for Life. On that same August, on August 15th, which also was his birthday, he had this massive celebration in Notre Dame. Part of this was that event gave them the idea that they should do this big coronation. So on April 30th, 1804, 2 years later, he proposed that he should be proclaimed the Emperor of the French, declaring also that the Bonaparte family held a hereditary descendants of the throne. So from here on out, it was going to be the Bonapartes. But he specifically said he decided to have it be the Emperor of the French, because before that you had like the Holy Roman Emperor, and Charlemagne was one of them, and so they were emperor of more than just one country. So he wanted to make sure that people didn't think he was going to go out and conquer other countries, which of course he would have loved to have done. But, we'll just call yourself the Emperor of the French. It was approved a week later. And then on May 19th, he took the oath. And then in June, the next month, they debated on where they would do a ceremony for the coronation. It was talked about to do it in a few other places. They did not want to do it in Reims, which is in Champagne, which is where the other kings of France were coronated. Again, let's move away from anything that tied themselves to that. So they decided he was the only one who had in mind to do this in Notre Dame. But it was finally decided, because they thought, well, we could do it in the Champ de Mars over by the Eiffel Tower, but they'd have to build a whole thing. And this was December. So they thought it'd be pretty cold and be really expensive. And so he was pushing for that and saying, oh, it's going to be cold and expensive. And finally, they went with Notre Dame, which is what he wanted all along. So he's pretty tricky.
They made the right choice.
They definitely made this right choice. So September, for 10 days, Napoleon went to Aix-la-Chapelle, which is where Charlemagne was buried. And Charlemagne was the king of the Franks, and he was over at that time what we know as France today. And so by going there, he also linked himself to this great emperor. And it was so important to him that he asked for the reliquary items used for Charlemagne to be brought to him in Paris. And so Vivant Denon, who was the first curator of the Louvre, which at that time was known as the Musée Napoleon, was in charge of that. And we'll do a whole nother episode on all of those pieces because you could still find some of these pieces to see. And some of them will also be in Notre Dame. So once it reopens and I could get there inside the treasury and share that, we'll definitely do another one. Um, but on November 17th, they had a meeting at Saint-Cloud with the Bonaparte family. And at this family meeting were the brothers and the sisters and his mother. And only two of the brothers were there because he was in a feud with the other two brothers, Lucien and Jérôme, because both of them had made other choices in marriage that Napoleon didn't really like, even though nobody liked Josephine. Everybody was pretty mad about Josephine. And so at this big meeting with the family, the sisters were mad because they didn't have titles, and the sisters-in-law were known as queen consorts, and he was fighting with the brothers. So the mother got so mad and she decided that she just was going to leave and not even be there.
And didn't he like have her painted into the picture?
Exactly, exactly. I'll tell you all about that. But it sounds like just any other family occasion between anybody these days.
Yeah, the mother-in-law usually doesn't like her daughter-in-law.
Exactly. I think maybe this is where it all stemmed from. But the Pope ended up coming to, he was really important for Napoleon to bring the Pope here to Paris. And that was really quite the ordeal to get that. During the revolution, they basically, deemed the church just, it was null and void because like things like Notre Dame became the Temple of Reason because at the time that the church was aligned so closely with the kings of France. You had kings like Louis XIV that thought that God worked through his hands and he literally could touch people and heal them. So they were so intertwined. That's why things like that were destroyed, like what they did at Notre Dame with the statues. So but it was really important for him to get the Pope here because that also legitimizes himself, because the Pope was always the one who crowned the Holy Roman Emperor. So getting to Paris from Italy, he left on November 5th. He finally got to Fontainebleau December or November 25th. And Napoleon had restored an entire wing of rooms for him. And you could still see those rooms today. And then he also did the same thing in the Tuileries. So 3 days later, the Pope arrived in Paris and he moved into the Tuileries, staying in the Pavillon de Flore, which is the part of the Tuileries we can still see today there at the very end of the Louvre. But the next day they had a rehearsal for the coronation, and it was made up of this little model that basically was like paper dolls of the different figures, Napoleon and Josephine and the Pope. Created by Jean-Baptiste Isaby, who was our artist who put all of this together. But on December 1st, so the night before the coronation, Josephine decided to tell the Pope in confidence that she was worried because they weren't married in the eyes of the church. They were only married in a civil ceremony. And she did this on purpose because the Pope then said, I can't attend the ceremony unless you guys are married in the eyes of a church. I can't even be there in the room. So they had a private ceremony that night in the Tuileries done by the Cardinal Joseph Fesch, who was also Napoleon's uncle. But Josephine was very smart to do this because now her marriage was in the eyes of the church, and it would be very hard for Napoleon to get rid of her.
Stuck with her.
I know. So she was pretty smart. Napoleon wanted to reduce the Pope's attendance to just being there as a head of state. But the fanfare in Paris everybody was pretty excited that the Pope was here. And so he decided not to do that, but he did alter how he would be a part of the ceremony. with the opening of Notre Dame coming up this week, it was originally thought that maybe the Pope would come to Paris, but he decided not to, which is probably a good thing because the security this week around the opening is going to be pretty intense. If you threw the Pope in there too, I'm sure it'd be even crazier.
Yeah, it's a good idea for that guy to stay away.
Yeah, he's going to Corsica instead. But on December 2nd at 9 a.m., the Pope left the Palais de Tuileries. He was surrounded by a squadron of officers, but right behind his carriage was the Cardinal Speroni, who was followed the Pope sitting on a gray mule. It was customary in these sort of functions that a cardinal would ride behind the Pope on a white mule, but they could not find one at the last minute, so they had to get this gray mule. And he was this rather large cardinal in this, full purple robe, sitting on the back of a this gray mule, slowly sauntering through the streets of Paris, which had to be quite the vision.
I would like to see pictures of that.
Yeah, I think that would be like, I think that guy would definitely get the short end of the stick. It'd be like, okay, if I could be the Pope next, I'll do it.
Sign me up.
Sign me up. But once the Pope got to Notre Dame, at Notre Dame itself, because it was completely falling apart at the time, it was, post-revolution, it was used as a storehouse, it was literally crumbling. But, Napoleon had this grand vision, aligning himself to the neoclassical and the Roman ideology. So, Percier Fontaine, they were the architects of Napoleon that worked on the Louvre and anything else he did. And so they went in and kind of created these, covered up the pillars. They made balconies and they built this massive throne with like 25 steps. They out front did this huge entryway that had, banners and sculptures and everything. And in the back side of it, on the northeast corner, they built this beautiful, and I have drawings of it, of this beautiful kind of round, almost circus tent looking, but covered in fabrics and gorgeous. So they'd come up on the horse, with their carriage, they'd let them out there, and then they'd walk covered through the back, outside of Notre Dame into the Archbishop's apartment. And then that's where the Pope would change. At 10 o'clock, after that, after they left, Napoleon left. And Napoleon and Josephine left from the Tuileries. They went down Rue Saint-Honoré and over Pont Neuf. Once they got to the center of Pont Neuf, they passed through the Place Dauphine to enter into the island. The route along the way, they thought about, all these vistas and images that Napoleon wanted. So they were destroying buildings that would be in the way. They destroyed and redecorated, cleaning everything up. The streets were lined with people, but accounts were that people were just kind of almost silent watching them go by. There wasn't this big fanfare, but there's images and paintings of this. There's one at the Carnavalet that actually has people looking like they're cheering, and most accounts say that people just kind of stood and watched. He was led in this golden carriage inside, lined with white velvet with gold ends and bees embroidered on it. He and Josephine were wearing their what they called the small costumes that they would travel in. And they were the carriage was pulled by 8 horses, wearing red Moroccan leather, and then had gold bronze that was gilded, and then big white feathers coming off the top of the horses. But once they arrived, they came into the back, and it was this 25 carriages. It was their cortege that came through. But they didn't think, what this would do with the effect of the street and the small streets and turning. This is, pre-Napoleon III, so the streets are smaller, and they would get in constant traffic jams every time the cortege tried to turn a corner. So it took a lot longer to get to the cathedral than they thought. And the Pope had to just sit there and wait. And it was a freezing cold December day, 2 days before that there had been snow and like a windstorm that actually destroyed some of the decorations on Notre Dame that had to be recreated. But the Pope was just sitting there in the freezing cold cathedral waiting for them.
Wait, what? They kept him waiting?
Yeah, they kept him waiting because Napoleon didn't care. He's like, this guy's just here to make me look better. So when they finally got there, when they got into the cathedral, away from the eyes of everybody. They got dressed in their ground costumes. And he was wearing gold silk embroidered with gold bees on it and ends on his stockings and white satin boots. And everything says that his velvet coat that he was wearing, it says purple, but there's a piece of it that was found and it's been restored and will be in Notre Dame. And it's definitely dark, dark red. Everything I've ever seen is dark red, but when I read it, articles or books about it, it's always described as purple.
Yeah, it looks very red to me.
It's very red, yeah. So when they walked the corridor on the outside that took them to the front of the cathedral was lined in Gobelin tapestries, and at the bottom of the steps before they entered, because they had this huge entry with steps built, the 95-year-old Cardinal de Blois was waiting for them to greet them. They entered the cathedral and walked up to the throne to where the Pope was sitting, and he blessed the couple and all of his sword and everything, all the instruments of it. And those were all things that Napoleon didn't want him to do. He just basically was like, nope, you're not going to do any of that. And he was just like, well, this is the ceremony, though, dude. This is how it goes.
No choices here. This is what
No.
you.
But the ceremony lasted 5 hours. It should not have lasted that long, but it lasted 5 hours. And there was a woman there named Laure Junot. She was a duchess. Her husband was a minister of Napoleon. She was in attendance of this, and she kept a very detailed diary. She later became the lover of writer Henri de Balzac, which he convinced her to publish this 18 volume set memoir. She documented, so this is how we kind of know about the gossip that went on. It said, but just as the Pope was about to take the crown, Napoleon seized it and placed it on his own head. At that moment, he was handsome and was lit up with an expression of which no words can convey an idea.
I like that. I want
I
the
mean,
words.
yeah, pretty fancy. After that, it was Napoleon, Josephine's turn. So Napoleon's great love and this first wife was she walked up, kneeled down, and he took the throne and placed it on her head as well. One of the chief beauties of Josephine was merely her beautiful figure and her elegant neck. But she was 41 years old, so she was 8 years older than Napoleon at the time. And she, luckily because it was a painting, some years were shaved off of her in the end, from what you see. But after they did this, the crowd erupted with, long live the emperor, vive le roi. So everybody was, it was quite the thing to be at. But this is all perfectly captured, of course, in the beautiful painting done by Jacques-Louis David that is in the Louvre. It is one of the most popular paintings in the Louvre after the Mona Lisa, of course, and it is huge. It is 20.37 feet by 32 feet big, the size of it. And David, when he painted it, he thought he was going to be painting the largest painting in the world. The biggest painting in the Louvre is the Wedding Feast of Cana, which is one that Napoleon did steal in 1798 from Venice. And it is 22.2 feet by 32.6. So it is just a little under 2 feet taller, but almost the same length. But the painting was there in the Louvre, but David thought he was going to paint the biggest painting in the Louvre. He didn't start painting the actual piece until a year after the coronation on December 21st, and was inspired by Rubens' painting of Marie de Medici's coronation. You could also see in the Louvre. There was a long go back that went back and forth between David and Napoleon. David actually was a painter. He did some paintings for Louis the 16th and for the crown. He's one of the few people that was actually able to maneuver between going from the Bourbons to the Bonapartes Bonaparte's. And Napoleon wanted him to paint for him. He did an early painting of Napoleon, and it's in the Louvre. It's an unfinished painting. It's one of my very favorites, and it's also the only painting that Napoleon ever sat for, that he ever posed for. And so later he was like, no, I actually am naming you the official painter to the government, and didn't even talk to David about it. And then later, when David was asked about it in for an article, he publicly said, no, I'm not doing that. I declined the offer. So, I think it was just that classic French way, of playing hard to get. Because finally he gave in to Napoleon and became the chief painter. Napoleon commissioned him to do four large paintings over basically his life as emperor, and only two were done. So the first one, of course, is the coronation. The second one was the Oath of the Eagles, which you can see at Versailles. But for this one, David wanted to get everything right. So he worked with them in advance. The artist Isaby, was actually working with the costumers on what they were going to wear. David would see these costumes ahead of time. He was there at the time when they did, deciding where people were going to stand. David was supposed to be in a spot where he'd have a good view of everything, and he's actually painted himself into the painting too. But Sujet and Isaby, Sujet was the master of ceremonies that kind of coordinated everything from the top. He decided to basically stick him in the back of the choir so he wouldn't see anything. And David got so upset about it, they actually had a fist fight. And he ended up thankfully winning. And so he could have a view and sketch the ceremony in actual time.
That's so funny. They got a fist fight.
No, it's pretty hilarious. I mean, they should, they made the Napoleon movie last year that they did with Joaquin Phoenix in it. And I was the most excited, like, oh my gosh, here comes the coronation. And then I was like, oh, really? Like, it just really was not. Of course, they couldn't bring the whole thing to life. It would have cost a fortune, but I was the most excited about that. But maybe they should just do a movie just about the behind the scenes of this painting and the event.
Yeah, that could be a whole movie.
Would be pretty good. But he asked to have people come to his studio to pose for them. He would bring, even after the event, he'd ask for their, wardrobe and their costumes, and even the elements like the crown and all the elements of it to bring brought to his atelier. Pretty much everybody except for Napoleon and Josephine. And of course, the mother did not come to his atelier, but the Pope did. And the Pope at first was a little worried about going there and meeting him, because he was worried to sit for the man that killed the king, because David was actually a part, and he voted for the death of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, and also Alexander de Beauharnais, who was the first husband of Josephine. But apparently, everybody kind of forgot about that. But the Pope and David got along very well, and actually kind of became friends. But he also painted a painting of the Pope that you could find in the Louvre as well, just opposite of the coronation. But he would have people come to his atelier. He said he would need 2 hours to sketch if it was just their head, if there was just their face was in the painting. And if it was their full figure, he needed a whole day. It's reported that he went to the Tuileries to sketch Josephine and Napoleon's mother. But when you look at the painting, you would think that maybe it was a representation of that day, but of course it wasn't. It wasn't completely that way. He took, he changed some things along the way, especially like you said, adding the mother in. She refused to come because Napoleon's brother was his second wife was a woman that he did not approve of. He thought she was a lowly sales girl, and she was divorced. And so Napoleon didn't like her. So there was a big fight. And so even though Josephine was divorced, and so they got in a fight. He wasn't going to come. His brother Jerome, get this, he was in the US at the time, because he went to the US, and guess where he married a woman from?
Maryland?
Exactly.
Woohoo!
So he was mad. He didn't like that idea. Later, when his brother tried to come back to France, he wouldn't allow him in the country until he divorced his wife. So he divorced his wife from Maryland, and they let him in back into the country.
Oh my gosh, you kicked him out of France.
Yeah, but his mother was so mad about all this, she did not attend. Also, she didn't like Josephine, so she was not at the wedding. And so David painted her in later, and he kind of did that as is on his own. Napoleon didn't even tell him. But the other major thing that was originally in the first sketches of the painting was Napoleon crowning himself, as I mentioned from the quote from Junot. The Pope was supposed to put the crown on his head. If you had watched the coronation of King Charles of England, the bishop puts the crown on Charles' head and he walks out of the church. But with this, Napoleon decided, no, you're not going to do that. And his laurel wreath crown was sitting on the altar. He reached past the Pope, grabbed it, and stuck it on his own head, and then grabbed the other crown and put it for Josephine. But he originally, there are drawings of that, and there's a painting in Philadelphia of the Pope with the Cardinal Caprara next to him, and they did an X-ray on this painting years and years ago, and underneath it, they saw that this was the original drawing of that he did of Napoleon holding the crown over his head.
That is so funny. I love it. He's just like, I'm taking charge.
I'm just doing it. So the original plan was to put him in the painting that way. But everybody kind of thought, well, maybe that's going a little too far. Like maybe that's a little too arrogant. So they decided to change it so that he was crowning Josephine, essentially taking him from the narcissist to a knight.
A narcissist to a knight. That's very
Yeah.
interesting.
Isn't that perfect? But he later said, when he was exiled before he died, that he said it was a plot between Josephine and David to do that because it made her look much grander because he's coronating her. But the painting is called The Coronation of Napoleon.
Yeah,
So
they could have, yeah.
but I mean, and it's also just the way, I mean, it's very beautiful. And if you look at that, and then you also look at Rubens, and I'll put pictures of this on my website, you could definitely see where that came from. Another thing that was supposed to happen is when they did have that big fight, the couple weeks before the ceremony between the family, the sisters were supposed to, hold her train and carry it. And so they would not do that. And they finally agreed because he said, if you don't do it, I'm going to exile you. So you have to do this. But they said, we will not be in the painting that way because they did not want to be remembered throughout time as being seen holding the train of Josephine.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want that either.
No. So in the painting, it's actually her ladies in waiting that are doing it. But when the ceremony was done, there was back towards as you're walking out of Notre Dame at the middle of the entrance, so below the west rose window, there was a massive throne with 25 stairs set up, and there was the throne of Napoleon, and next to it a smaller throne for Josephine. And they did actually have to hold onto her train because it was quite long and heavy because it was velvet and lined with ermine fur. And so they did have to hold that. And Madame Junot wrote that they gave a tug to it as she started going up the stairs and she almost fell over backwards.
They forgot to leave that in the painting.
Yeah, but when he decided and changed his mind of changing Napoleon from crowning himself, because he was basically kind of leaning back, standing up very grand, holding this over his head. By the fact that they changed it, so he's almost leaning forward instead a little with the crown in his hands, it left a big gap in the back of him, this big kind of V-shaped gap. So David decided to paint in a different emperor, and that emperor that was not, in fact, at the actual event was Julius Caesar.
That
So when you look at the painting, you could see just behind him is the face of Julius Caesar, and he decided to do that. And he actually used he in his notebooks he has drawings of the face of Julius Caesar that he copied off of statues that he saw in the Louvre. and he placed that in there, and it's pretty hilarious. And it's not many people spot that or know that, but it was, because obviously Julius Caesar was not there. But again, it's another way of aligning Napoleon with this Roman, general and emperor, in a way, but also making it so Napoleon is physically higher and above him. Behind him, the Pope was originally sketched with his finger up, like almost like pointing and anointing him. And Napoleon, or sorry, the other way around, he was had his hands on his lap. And Napoleon said, I didn't bring him to do here to just do nothing. And so David changed it so he has his finger up, kind of anointing him.
He gave him a job.
He gave him a job. Um, but having his mother that she refused to come, but Napoleon was very touched later that she was added in there. But the painting is huge, and it is really, in a way, and even Napoleon said it, you could almost walk into the painting. But David even thought about where when you're standing in front of it, and you see the people, you have these basically almost like bouquets of people. On the left, you have his brothers, then you have the sisters and the sisters-in-law, and on the right, you have different ministers and even Eugene, who's his adopted son, that was Josephine's son. All these different groups in the painting, but they're up a little higher so that when you're looking at it, the whole painting, of the people, you can't really step into it without stepping up. He also did it so he lowered the size of Notre Dame. So behind him, which is really difficult to see in this version of the painting in the Louvre because it's darker, but you can see the clear story windows of Notre Dame, which are actually very, very high. I mean, they're basically right below the roof. So he did the change of a perspective, but in a way that you go walk into the story, but still it's very grand and above you. He finally finished the painting, and Napoleon signed off on it on January 4th, 1808. So 4 years after the event. And it was displayed for the very first time in February of 1808 for a month and a half in the Louvre. After that, he took it down and lightened some of it, and then it appeared again in that fall of October 1808 till January 1809 for the Salon. After that, it remained in his property until 1819. He's finally sold it to the Royal Museum, and they tucked it away into the reserves until 1837, and then it was displayed in the Crown Room of Versailles. Now, if you go to Versailles, there is a version of it there. In 1889, the version you see in the Louvre was sent there from Versailles, and it was replaced with a replica that was ordered in 1807 by a group of American businessmen that bought it to bring it to the US, where they send it around to all the big cities of the US for people to see it. He didn't finish it by the time he was exiled to Belgium, where he remained until 1825, his death. He finished it just before he died, and then that it never went to America. And the Versailles version is almost identical because that is the version that he did for the American businessman, except for Pauline's dress is actually pink, and the balcony is much lighter, and you can see the faces a little bit better. But it's amazing when you see the size of that painting and know that he did two of them.
Yeah, I had no idea he did too.
Yeah, so the one at Versailles, it's kind of cool because it's lighter, so you could really see those details of the people in the balcony and that you can't see in the Louvre because that one is just a little bit darker. But it is still pretty cool, and it is funny that, really there's a few of the faces he changed. And we'll talk more about the other figures in it and also the elements that you can still see because there's pieces that are in Notre Dame and there's pieces that are in the Louvre still today. But it is a pretty amazing painting. At one point I was like, I'm going to figure out who every single person is in that painting. And there's anywhere between 186 to 199 characters, depends on what I'm researching.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah. And some of them are just like the ones in the balconies. The ones in the balcony near David, he has his wife and his two teenage daughters he painted in front of him there, but the other people he just painted, gave them faces of like friends and other artists, but they don't really, they still don't really know who they are. And then also in the balcony kind of behind The altar itself, those are just a bunch of mostly random faces. We don't know who really any of them are. But one thing that's interesting, if you take that, if you look at that painting and then, you're going into Notre Dame, now that we could go in soon, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go stand right here and see exactly the same view. You won't see it at all. I mean, the edge of the Pietà is there, but he also removed and did not put the vow. So there's two statues looking up at the Pietà of Louis the 13th and also Louis the 14th, but he didn't include those in the painting because, of course, because they're, the Bourbon kings, they didn't want them in the painting, but they would have been there.
Yeah, I need to take a closer look after recording this because I know so much more now.
I know it is pretty fascinating, and literally, like the putting the things together to talk about today, it took hours because there's so much about this painting. I had to figure out which direction we'd actually go in because we'd probably be recording this for 4 hours.
Never ending.
So we'll have some other ones, but in the next couple weeks, it's going to be all about Notre Dame.
Well, guys, make sure you head over to claudinehemingway.com to learn more and tune in next week. Thanks for listening today, guys. If you're interested in learning more about Claudine, her tours, history, and the beautiful photographs that she posts all over Instagram, tune into her website, claudinehemingway.com.